Well, good morning, Father's House friends and family. Thank you once again for joining us on this Sunday morning video service. I hope you all enjoyed the rain that we've gotten the last few weeks, especially yesterday. I think it rained all day long. Um, I didn't even get to get my steps in. I was driving Pastor Carl crazy. Anyway, it's sunny today, and we'll be cooking some barbecued chicken out there. We're going to have our communion Sunday. We'd love to have you join us. If you want to shut off your video and make a mad dash to the church, we'd love to have you be part of it. I don't have very much to go over today. Our men's group is meeting on Monday nights, 6:30 here at the Father's House and on Zoom. If you want to be a part of that, let Pastor Carl or Pastor Carlos know. They'll resume it the second Monday of this month. So I guess I should have said Happy New Year too. Anyway, our ladies group is going to start a new study on Thursday nights at 6:30 on Zoom. It's called The Book of Amos, An Invitation for the Good Life by Jennifer Rothschild. I've ordered my book, but it said it was going to take 9 days to get here, so I didn't have the book to show you, but I thought I'd show you the cover. So if you want to be a part of that, it's going to be an 8-week study, and it's a workbook and some videos to be watching and then discussing. So if you want to be a part of that, love to have you join us. Let myself know. The book runs about $22 plus shipping. So if you're interested in that, let myself or Deanne Parodies know, and we'll get the book ordered for you. Or if you want to go ahead and order your own book, they have it on Amazon, which is the same price as through her website. But if you order it through her website, she does give you a signed copy and another little workbook involved with it too. Anyway, let myself or Deanne Parodies know. We'd love to have you join us. Also wanted to mention that next week after church on Sunday, we're going to take our Christmas decorations down. So I would love to have some volunteers stay like half hour or 45 minutes after church and help us take the decorations down and get them stored back upstairs. That's all I have to, I do have to cover tithes and offerings. That's our regular tithes and offerings this week. If you want to give, you know the drill. You can mail a check to the Father's House at 133 Bernal Road, 95119. You can go online to thefathershouse.org and set it up that way as a one-time gift or a recurring gift. You can also give to our missions that way too. And if you live in the local area and you'd like myself or Pastor Carl to come by and pick up your tithes, we'd be happy to do that too. And once again, thank you for all you gave last year. Just to let you know, the statements will be going out for your tax purposes. They have to be to you by the end of January, so I'll probably be sending those out the second week. If for some reason you don't get it or something is incorrect on it, please call me so I can get it corrected for you. Anyway, that's all I have to cover today, so we'll turn the time over to Pastor Carl and see what he has to teach us today.
Well, good morning, Father's House. Glad to have you with us, and a happy new year at this first day of the new year. 2023 is already upon us. Can you believe that? 2022 came and went so fast. Maybe not for everybody, but it did for me, and I think the older I get, the faster it goes. That might be true for you as well. But that's just kind of the way that life goes anyway. Anyway, glad to have you here this first of the year. I'm trusting, Lord willing, we will have a great year, because if God's involved in our life, He only has our best interest in mind all the time. So it will be a great year, one way or the other. Not that it doesn't mean we won't have our struggles this coming year, because we will, but God will remain faithful because He always does. What can we say? Well, we'll talk a little bit here about where we're going to be headed next year, and that's study-wise, and that is we're going to finish up the book of James here in the next couple of weeks. And then after we get done with that, we're going to move into really kind of looking at the life of Jesus through some different lenses. I'll talk about them a little bit more when I get there, and then I kind of have more formulated in my mind the direction that I want to go with it as well. But I'm thinking about that. So this whole next year, we're going to just, I think, be spending it in the life of Christ for one whole year. Well, I mean, we might incorporate some other books of the Bible, but for the most part, we're going to stick with the gospel accounts and maybe just a few ancillary scriptures, I guess, other than those. But anyway, just wanted you to know where we're headed. Again, Patty said, thank you for all of your giving. We really do appreciate it. And as we go into this year, we're having great expectations that God will meet your needs as He meets the Father's house's needs as well. Well, with not much further ado, do you think we ought to probably see if we can crack this Bible open and get into the book of James and talk a little bit more about this character? So maybe we should. But before we do that, I want to say that, again, the book of James is a hard book to really teach because it's so fragmented. And that's why it doesn't read well when you read it. It's got a lot of different pithy statements, and James is tying different ideas together, but they're almost standalone. He changes direction very often. We're going to see in this text, he's going to change direction really kind of, I guess you could say 2 times or 3 times, but I'll see if I can bring it together on a couple of different concepts we're going to talk about today. And if I can bring it together all under the banner of humility and kind of juxtaposing humility and arrogance. And so he's kind of doing that. And I think that what he's kind of saying, and what I think we know to be true, is that we really begin to learn of God, or we really begin to not just learn really of God or in the presence of God or by way of divine revelation, but we really kind of learn in all of life when we're humble, when we have a humble attitude, a humble demeanor about learning. And the reason I say that is because we often think of being humble as being weak-minded, but that's not really what humility means. And we've talked about this before. Humility really has to do with controlled strength. It also has to do with recognizing our relationship in relations to others, whether it be people and a relationship in relation to God. And so there's this idea that the gateway into all knowledge really starts with humility. Think about what in Proverbs, the book of Proverbs has to say about that, when it says that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, but fools despise wisdom and instruction. Well, that word fear there, and we've talked about it before, meaning really respect or awe, or giving God his just due to some extent, always puts us in the position of realizing that we're man and that we have a certain dignity about us because God created us in his image and likeness. But there's this humility in understanding who God is. And when we understand that relationship, then we enter into a right mindset to be able to understand the things of God. I would say that that's true also when you think about it in learning, whether it was in our vocation, whether we're apprentices and learning in school from others that know the trades better than we do, or if we're in let's say that we're in an academic setting where our teachers are trying to convey different things to us. The only time that we really learn is when we really humble ourselves, take a humble posture towards those things that are being conveyed to us, and to really think them through, not realizing that we have any or all of the answers, but to understand that everybody has something to contribute to the conversation. So humility becomes a big part of our Christian journey. And here the Apostle James is going to talk a little bit about it, and I'm going to kind of bring it together because he's going to use 2 bookends. The first bookend is going to talk about humility, and at the very end he's going to talk about arrogance. And then there's a couple of things in between that we're going to discuss. So we're in James chapter 4, and we're going to pick up in verse 10, which really ties back to earlier verses, but I just want to use it as a bookend for the different changing thoughts that he's going to go into in a fragmented way. So verse 10 of James chapter 4 says, "Humble yourselves in the presence of the Lord, and he will exalt you." Now James is going to add a couple new thoughts. He says, "Do not speak against one another, brethren. He who speaks against a brother or judges his brother speaks against the law and judges the law. But if you judge the law, you are not a doer of the law, but a judge of it. There is only one lawgiver and judge, the one who is able to save and to destroy. But who are you to judge your neighbor?" And then he changes thought again. "Come now, you say today or tomorrow, we will go to such and such a city and spend a year there and engage in business and make a profit. Yet do you not know what your life, but yet you do not know what your life will be like tomorrow. You are just a vapor that appears for a little while and then vanishes away. Instead, you ought to say, if the Lord wills, we will live and do this or that. But as it is, you boast in all of your arrogance. All such boasting is evil. Therefore, the one who knows the right thing to do and does not do it, to him it is sin." So you can see in this text that he's at the beginning he said, humble yourself in front of God and that God will exalt you. And at the end of this text, he's saying, that your attitudes and your actions sometimes come across as being arrogant. And because they're arrogant, they're sin and they're really the evil way. So he's talking about humility and he's talking about arrogance. But he's talking about in between of these two verses that we talk about, one with humility and the other with arrogance. He talks in there about the idea of really not judging or not really talking against or being against our brother. And so the idea is that, when we and what he's saying is that to not talk against our brother, because when we talk against our brother, what we're doing is we're setting ourselves in a position to where we become his judge. And so in so doing that, then what happens is we're placing ourselves outside of the context of being human and becoming a judge of other people's actions. Now, in doing that, what he's talking about is that's a lot of times the way that we really could look at it would be like this. We see some of our Christian brothers or some of our friends or other people, maybe it's people at work that we work with. And what we see them doing is we see there's certain actions and things that they're doing, and we don't like those actions that they're doing, or things that they're saying, or the way that they're behaving, whatever the case might be. And so what happens is we form certain opinions about people based on what our idea is of how a person ought to act. So what he's saying here is that for us to observe the way that people act and see different things in their lives, we're all going to do that. That's going to be something that we are always evaluating people. Scripture kind of really points to that when it talks about our choice of friends, doesn't it? In the book of Proverbs. It's almost the idea of whoever we hang out with kind of is a reflection of us. So it's not that we don't see things in other people and that there's certain things in other people that we see that maybe we don't like, or maybe that would be sin and things that would be, counter-opposed to the way that we want to live our life. So to make those judgments within inside of ourselves is one thing. To discern those things for ourselves is one thing. But when we begin to articulate them to others and speak against that person, then what happens is that we're really demeaning that person or tearing that person down, or we're judging that person. And whenever we begin to judge somebody like that, then what we're doing is we're pulling ourselves above the law and becoming a judge of the law. In other words, we're putting ourselves in the seat of the judge rather than being in the seat of our or in the position of our brothers. So we're pulling ourselves out to some extent of this relationship, interpersonal relationship that we have with other people. Now, the apostle here, in talking about it, he says, but what you have to understand is that it's not your place to judge people that way, to speak against people like that. Because when you speak against people like that, what you're doing is, in some instance, is you're doing them violence. What you're doing is you're demeaning them, you're tearing them down. You're making a judgment based on your limited knowledge of their life. And so the apostle's saying, whenever you do that, you're acting arrogantly, because what you're doing is you're putting yourself above this very same law that you're judging them by. And then he goes on to say, and who are you, O man, to be able to judge your brother? Now think of that, or your neighbor. And so the idea is that when we judge our brother or when we judge our neighbor, when we do that, we can never make a true and correct judgment anyway, because we don't know all of the circumstances. It's almost like the idea of if we see somebody that is poor and maybe they have a family that doesn't have any food, and so the father, knowing that he's got to feed his family, not having any money or any means of being able to get what he needed for his starving children, was to go into a grocery store and steal the food that he needed in order to feed his family. Now, we could look at that and say that, that's the wrong thing. He shouldn't have done that. But then we may not be in a predicament to know that when he's stealing that food, the very reason that he's stealing that food. I'm not talking about it being right or wrong, him taking the food. I mean, I could understand it if my family was suffering. I would be tempted to do that, and I probably would have the ability inside myself to do that, because there are some things that are more important than the fact that Walmart has a bunch of shelves stacked full of food when you're in that kind of a situation. But for me to judge that person that maybe had to feed their family and didn't have the means, and to be very strict in my judgment of them, I wouldn't have the full knowledge of why they stole that food. In other words, if they would have had the money to buy the food, they would have bought the food. But their family's starving and they don't have the means to do that, so they've stolen the food. So in that case, and just looking at that as a scenario, who would I be to ultimately judge what that action was right or wrong? I mean, I could say that categorically it would be wrong to steal. I understand that. But the motivation behind it is something that I didn't understand. So I wouldn't have a full, or the ability to judge fully why it was that somebody was stealing from a store. So the idea, though, there is that there is only one lawgiver and judge, and that would be God. And that with God giving the law, and him being the one that will bring about justice by the law, is the one that has the knowledge to be able to deal with us. Therefore, it's not up to me to be able to make that judgment on a person. That doesn't mean that we don't have and shouldn't have in our courts and in the court system judges that adjudicate one man against another in society. I'm not talking about that. But James seems to be talking here in the context of being a Christian of a somewhat higher law, and that would be what? The law that says, thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, with all thy soul, with all thy mind, and love thy neighbor as thyself. The law that James is talking about here is he's talking about this law by which we love others out of the love of God and out of respect for them. So we have a respect for them, we have a value for those people, and so we don't rail against them. Whenever we rail against them, what happens is that we're not realizing that everybody is made in the divine image of God. And because they're made in the image of God, we're to respect them as such. That was the teaching of Jesus, and that's the teaching of James here in this context. So the second thing then is he begins to change, and he goes into a second scenario where he says, there's some of you businessmen, and he's talking again to the Jews that were out traveling about. He says that you're going to say, I know, let's go to such and such a city, and we'll go there and we'll conduct in business and we'll reap a profit. And so then, and the idea is that what they're doing is they're doing it in their own strength. And James says, you really think you want to go to another town and you want to make a lot of money? But I want to ask the question, what's life about anyway? Is life about the fact that you can go to another town and make a bunch of money? And do you think that that's what life consists of? And then he goes on to say, but don't you understand that if you think deeper about your life, that you're nothing more than a vapor anyway? In other words, you don't know what your life is going to consist of. Think about it this way. Okay, today is January 1st of 2023. Now, we could say, I know this next year, heck, I think I want to go down to LA and I want to start a business, and we're going to start this business. And while we're down there, we're going to make a lot of money off of this business. Now, you could say that I could say that I was going to do that. I could have every intention of doing that. But what if something happened that stopped me from doing that? Because life is contingent in that way. In other words, that might be something that I want to do, but that doesn't mean that life circumstances can't get in the way that would restrict me or would stop me from doing that very thing that I wanted to do. So James is kind of talking about, you don't know what life is going to be tomorrow because life is contingent. What I mean by that is it's always changing. It's changeable. Matter of fact, our life is so contingent that we're not even guaranteed our next breath, are we? And so then James goes on and says, but I want you to think about this. He said, because your life is nothing more than just a vapor, a minute, a moment in time, maybe you ought to redirect your focus away from your business and towards God. So then you say, maybe the right way you've got to look at this is, if the Lord wills, I'm going to go down to Los Angeles and I'm going to start a new business, and it will be very profitable next year. In that case, what's happening is I'm changing what it is I'm looking at. I'm not looking at myself. I'm not looking at my own profits. I'm realizing that life can go through different stages. I may make a profit. I may not. I may make it to LA. I may not make it to LA. But God is always the constant that's there. And so James is saying that in our business dealings, we should always have a God consciousness first before we have the idea of what it is that's to be our vocation. In other words, that we don't do our work and our vocation apart from God. We don't do that as if God is something separate and our business is something that's completely irrelevant to God. What he's saying is that God should be included in all of our dealings. And when we do that, we have a different perspective. Now, we've talked about two things, and I'll see if I can kind of wrap up a couple of points concerning both of these. The first one we talked about not speaking against our brother, and really not speaking against anybody, because we can't make that proper judgment. And he says that if we do that, what we're doing is we're taking the place of God in their life by judging them. But the minute that we do that, we're excluding God from the principle. In other words, God, if he's the lawgiver, and the law that he's given us is the law of love, then God will be the one to adjudicate with his actions. Your job is to respect and to honor that person. The second thing he says, in business also, don't forget about God the same way that you forgot about your neighbor, because when you forget about God, what you've done is you've become arrogant and you've exalted yourself and you've left God out of the mix. Now, we could talk about these texts, and we could talk and say a million things about these. And they are fragmented, and I understand that. But what is the underlying principle I think that he is trying to convey here? What it is that God's trying to convey, or what James is trying to convey? I think what he's trying to convey is that in all of our attitudes, in all of our actions, in all of our comings and goings, we remain in the place of humility. That we're not to become arrogant, think higher of ourselves than we ought to think, and lower of others than we ought to think. That the proper response of a Christian is to always control his mind and to control his thought towards others and give them the benefit of the doubt. God will make it right. You don't have to worry about it. And on the opposite side of that, in our coming and goings with our jobs, families, our vacations, our buying of homes, cars, whatever have you, is to always keep in mind that our life is contingent. Because our life is contingent, we don't know what tomorrow brings. We don't even know if we'll be alive tomorrow. We don't know if we'll be alive a half hour from now, because that's kept in God's keeping and by natural order. But at the end of it all, what James is saying, the right response, the right attitude to have, is that of humility. Maybe this, and coming to this text, is not really something that was happenstance to talk about today. As we're moving into 2023, maybe what it is that God may want to be teaching us today is that as we go through this year, we should acknowledge God in all things, know our place with God, that we're made in his image and likeness, but we're not God, and therefore we will honor God and honor his creation as well. I'm hoping that maybe this year what we'll do is we'll reflect and become a little bit less arrogant, a little less self-sufficient, a little less knowing it all, and we might become a little bit more humble. So I hope that you would maybe think about that. And the question today is, for all of us, is will we accept the idea that for us to grow in God, it requires us to be gracious towards people, to understand that they're made in the image and likeness of God, and to acknowledge God in all of our comings and going, to ultimately live our life in a state of humility. I think if we'll do that, what we'll find this year is that God will exalt us. What that means, we don't know. And if we don't live the rest of this year, if God was to take some of us home, at least we'd be able to say that we knew that in the contingency of life, we've trusted in God for all things. I hope you'll think about it today. And I hope that next year, as we go into this next year, that we'll have open arms towards people and understand our relationship with God. Have a great year, and I'm looking forward to sharing more with you if the Lord wills. God bless you.